Welcome everyone to today's episode of Voices for Social Justice. Voices stands for Voices of Innovative and Compassionate Experts in Society that can speak to how recent events have impacted communities all across America, and also topics like how advances in technology might provide solutions to some of the challenges in our modern day society. My name is Lien Diaz. I'm the director at the Constellations Center for Equity and Computing at Georgia Tech. Our mission is to democratize computing, but by no means is that an easy feat. So we've brought in some guests today, and I'm super excited to talk to them about how they focus on equity and how focusing on equity can increase access and opportunity and success in computing education. I want to introduce Gail Chapman, Director of Outreach for Exploring Computer Science. Through her career, Gail has focused on equitable education for all students and the impact that teachers and teaching can have on ensuring this. She is a co-designer of the ECS curriculum, Exploring Computer Science, and a professional development model. And she is also the recipient of the 2017 SIGSI Award for Outstanding Contribution to Computer Science Education. Welcome, Gail. Super excited that you're here with us today. We also have Dale Reed, a computer science professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago. He is also the Director of Curriculum for Breakthrough Tech in the Department of Computer Science. This is an amazing effort to increase the rate of female graduates in computer science at the post-secondary level. Dale was also part of a massive effort to bring computer science to every student in Chicago public schools. He started by visiting area high schools. He gave hundreds of presentations to many students, and his goal was to get them excited about CS and also connect them to the university. He's a professional development lead for ECS and was also on the inaugural development committee for AP Computer Science Principles, where he helped shape curriculum and the exam for that course. Welcome, Dale. So excited that you're here with us.
I have a question, Lynn.
Yeah. Yes, Dale.
What was your relationship with that AP CSP course?
Well, I was formerly at a college board and worked in the AP program and helped to develop that course as well.
You were my boss there.
That's fun. Yeah, and Gail also was formerly at college board as well too, years ago as well too. Small world.
Right.
Today we're going to be talking to the both of you about a couple of things. The first is on race and class in our education system and how this affects computer science education. And the other thing I wanted to ask both of you to share is your perspectives on how we move beyond traditional professional development to really move the needle in reaching equity for, our minoritized groups in America, our young girls, our students of color in K-12, who we all know are too often left out of quality STEM and computing education. So I want to get right to it, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the tremendous experience we've just gone through this past week, right, in terms of our democratic process, our voting process, and emotions running high this week and last week. Our nation has gone through so much in recent years, and especially in the last one, so many Americans openly protesting against hate crimes, the brutal murders of Black men and women in our nation. And then on top of that, we got this COVID pandemic, which has affected so many people, especially in low-income communities and people of color in our country. So my first question to you is, I want to hear about your thoughts on where you think we are now in terms of American education. Do issues of race and class still permeate in the classroom? And you know, Gail, maybe you'd like to start us off with your perspectives on, in this K-12 space, and maybe we can follow up with Dale with his perspectives at the post-secondary level.
So that's a question that I've been thinking about a lot over the last 25 years, maybe more, but in particular this year. I say week. I'm never sure if this year has been a week long or 10 years long, but what I do know is that when we first encountered the COVID pandemic and schools very quickly shut down and students were forced to learn from wherever, home, parking lots, the many places that they may or may not have found hotspots. Things that we've known for years and have been trying to say for years in terms of access to technology, access to broadband, came into stark relief. And the number of people that seemed surprised by that, and then seemed surprised by the fact that there were inequalities in where that access happened, started me on a year-long banging my head against a wall trip, because the work that I've been doing now is based on a book that was researched 20 years ago. And the title of the book is Stuck in the Shallow End: Education, Race, and Computing. This isn't new news. We have a system of education that is in sad need of repair. And I think maybe the good news that has come out of this year is that maybe it's not, maybe we'd like it to be more peaceful, but you can't hide from it anymore.
Right, and it's not easy to have the tough and uncomfortable conversations that are necessary, perhaps, to really be, reflective in terms of what can be done, what is our role, and collectively, what solutions can we work together towards. Dale, do you want to chime in terms of your experiences through, these recent events at the post-secondary level?
So I'll state the obvious. I'm a white male. I may not be obvious, but anyhow, I am. And as a white male, I'm working to increase the percentage of women in computer science. So if we leave this job only to women who are already in the field, then we are burdening women with this when really it's an issue that belongs to all of us. So that's gender. But the same thing applies to race. When we think about what's the percentage of Latino students, and particularly African American female students that are in computer science, it is disproportionately low compared to the population. So recently there were some political statements made by leaders who shall remain nameless to protect the guilty, and those statements were that there is no racism in America. And I thought that that was an astonishing statement to say that. A month ago, I was on a call with a community college colleague and another one of his colleagues who was female and Chinese. And on that call, he said, "Oh, I had the good fortune to recruit a native English speaker, but then I lost her. She ended up going to a different school instead." And I was just I cringed, and I thought, how can he not hear what he just said and how that would play for the woman on the call who is not a native English speaker, who's Chinese. He was white. So my experience is that racism is alive and well in America. And lest you think that I'm pointing the finger, racism is alive and well with me. I have racist attitudes. I have attitudes and biases that I have to work against in my teaching, in my communication. I think it's difficult to avoid the issue of racism in education today.
Yeah, and I just wanted to share your perspectives made me remember how I felt when I first started teaching in a school in West Texas, and it was my first year. It was actually my second year teaching, and it was when I first started to formulate this notion of, these biases and the sort of racism that exists in classrooms. And I had not noticed that as a student in high school, and I had not noticed that as a student in college. But it was when I first started teaching in my second year where I noticed certain things that I just felt these things that are happening to students is not right. A student getting, suspended because of the pants that he's wearing, or a student being put in a certain class because of his or her grades without even understanding what was happening in his or her personal life. At any rate, it was my first notion that made your statement so true for me. Racism is alive and well in America, in American education, and in each one of us. And thank you for sharing that. It kind of made me remember that experience and how I felt as a young teacher many, many years ago. I wanted to follow up with that because we know that things like COVID or this pandemic, that it did not create the economic injustices or the barriers in our American economy or in our American education, but these things have existed for so long for educators, particularly in low-income communities. What's your take on how all of that has sort of exposed the depths of inequities, in our low-income communities across America?
So are you,
like, for example,
are you asking how COVID has exposed that, or are you asking?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, how COVID has exposed that.
Because again, I think after George Floyd this summer, the pandemic had already started, and schools had already started to recognize yet again that there were these inequities in access. And then it became very clear that race was at the cornerstone of that. It wasn't possible to just talk about low income, right? There were clear racial disparities happening. And this all occurred right before our summer PD season began, right? You had asked earlier about professional development and how that can happen and what kinds of conversations can we have with teachers. And that word is part of it. Having conversations with teachers. Having conversations with teachers about how to have conversations with students. But if we don't have the conversation, we can't move forward. And it's not good enough for all the white people to sit in a room and talk, and then have all the black people sit in a room and talk. We have to talk with each other, and that requires listening, and it requires examining your own biases, the assumptions that you've made. And for people who have worked in this arena for years and years and years, if you're not constantly growing and evolving in your thinking, then you're not paying attention to a whole lot of things that are going on, because it's not simple, right? These problems that we have are complex, and it's part of the reason why we haven't changed that system in all of these years. Because when we get down to the economics of it, which is, at the end of the day, that's got a lot to do with the way people think, is their own economic stability. People don't want to hear that there's a racial component to that. Right? They don't want to hear it.
So
I
yeah,
have some thoughts here
yeah,
too.
mhm.
Early this summer, there was a summer program that we did for females and for underrepresented groups. And we challenged them to do the best they could in their environment. Now, a bunch of them didn't have computers, so we sent them a computer. A bunch of them didn't have reliable internet, so we sent them hotspots so they could participate. One of these young women often was in the backseat of a car, I think next to McDonald's, where I think she was getting signal from. And so the economic disadvantage, she was Latina, for her meant that she had to go to Herculean efforts to try and do what other people would be no big deal, just sit in the living room or in their bedroom. Other students, when I asked them, why do you have your camera and your microphone off? It's because they're screaming in the background and the TV's on and their other siblings are sharing the same room. And so the financial realities for many of our students make it hard for them to communicate and do anything. Because right now, like those of you who are listening to this is being mediated by a computer and by a network. And if you don't have a computer and you don't have a network, then you can't take classes, you can't work, you can't do all these things right now. And that disproportionately has affected at-risk populations. So today, CSTA came out with a link to a study from the Kapoor Center. I think they did it in conjunction with the CSTA. And it's called Teacher Perspectives on COVID-19's Impact on K through 12 Computer Science Instruction. Lynn and Gail, I'm not sure if you're nodding your head. So, and in there it says, well, 18% of all teachers report suspending computer science instruction. Then there was higher for high poverty schools. So 24% had to suspend instruction versus only 14% in low poverty schools. So 10% difference. So poverty and race, not always, but often go hand in hand, affects the opportunity that students have.
Yeah, we will be sure to also reference that report that the Kapoor Center came out with.
And one other story. I have another student who contacted me in my class this semester. He said, yeah, my dad got COVID, and because he got COVID, he lost his job. And because of immigration laws right now, we have to now leave the country. So I'm going to be in Mexico, and in the town where we are in Mexico, I think I may not have Wi-Fi. I may not be able to continue in this class. The bright student, otherwise everything is fine. But because what happened with immigration, because his dad was at risk and his dad got COVID, he can't finish my course. He can't finish his degree at UIC, or it will be difficult.
Wow. I mean, that kind of makes me want to, figure out a way, like, what should the CSED community be thinking about in terms of, our role in elevating these challenges and, these stories that you're sharing, Dale, can't be the only ones. There's got to be many, many, many more students. And I just, both of you have been a part of this computer science education community for a very long time. And I think we're at a pivotal point in our country's politics and our country's awareness, and perhaps slightly more willing to have these conversations. What do you think the role of the CS Ed community can be to dismantle some of these barriers and, really come up with some solutions to improve on these conditions for those kinds of students, for those students that you're talking about, Dale, that are struggling? Because the students that have the resources, they're gonna be okay, right? They might have some challenges, but they're gonna be okay, but not the other students. What are your thoughts on that?
And it just keeps, those students that already have the wherewithal to be able to sit in their homes and have a computer, and, in many cases, their parents are home, which is, often problematic in other ways, but they have the ability to be at home without worrying about childcare, and they have the ability to work with their children on schoolwork. And, meanwhile, we have essential workers that are in fact essential workers, and teachers are essential workers. I think this is the other thing that has just been very difficult for me to understand in the middle of all of this, is that in the spring, teachers were heroes. Now teachers are being blasted again for not doing more. And I'm here to tell you, I've been working with these teachers all summer and all fall, and many of them doing PD online right now because they're desperate for something, right? And in the meantime, they're teaching classes online, many of them teaching in these hybrid circumstances, which I don't see ultimately how that ends up being good for any of the students. But again, because of all these other barriers, the same students that have had limited access before are falling further and further through the cracks because we can't, And then there's compliance, because we have school districts feeling like they have to have some sort of metric to ensure that students aren't, quote, falling behind. Falling behind what right now? It's just everything I think about raises one more question that I don't have good. If I had an answer, I would be able to retire, but I don't.
So I think it can be really discouraging to think about COVID and the negative effects. But when I think about the flip side, when I think about the choices that we have as educators and hope, I will say that when I was told, oh, we're going online for our classes, I just about despaired. I thought, I should go apply at Home Depot. Maybe I should do that. I would like that maybe better than teaching online. But then I saw some models of teaching online, and I thought maybe there's hope. And at some point, maybe I could comment on, but I want to say that ECS, professional development, changed my philosophy and my practice as a teacher. So Gail, you have gone through, you've navigated this like professional development and doing things online. I'm just curious how you would describe for listeners, what are the characteristics of doing things online that nonetheless can capture some of the goodness of what we try and do as teachers?
So I think we start with the same principles that, students bring a wealth of knowledge to the table already. That knowledge may not be computer science. It may not be obviously something that fits into the standards, but students bring their own creativity, and capturing that and valuing it and making sure that students can connect it to their lives is still important. Teaching is still important. I mean, we had the luxury when we started this insanity to have already been doing research on professional development online on one side of the world, and research on racial inequity and conversations that teachers are having about race in our professional development. And so putting those couple of two things together, what we found was that what works for students in person still works for students and teachers online, right? You need to create a community of learners. You need to make sure that there is something, reverse the questions. People have said to me, well, I can't get the students to turn their video on. Well, what can you do to make them want to turn their video on, right? And maybe they won't in a large group because I don't want everybody seeing the inside of my house all the time, right? I'm here in this, 2-bedroom apartment, which is pretty nice, but, it's not what I want everyone to see all the time, right? And so students they're people, and they have lives, and they may not want to share those lives, but maybe they're willing to do it in a small group of 2, which is how we know that it works in person, right?
Right.
So, all right. So now I went off.
Actually, this is a good segue into what I wanted to talk about in terms of professional development and the Exploring Computer Science curriculum, in my honest opinion, really engages students in non-threatening ways, or at least it advocates for that. And it advocates to help develop a sense of belonging in computing, which is very lacking in many, many other curricula, quite honestly. And all 3 of us have, reviewed and seen many, many curricula. But Exploring Computer Science does a pretty darn good job at that. I wanted to turn to like practices, like instructional and professional development practices. Like, Dale, you've been instrumental really in influencing a lot of people, educators, to practice inclusive and engaging pedagogy, and especially at the college level, CS courses, but you also do that at the K-12 level, or particularly with Exploring Computer Science. Would you agree that these type of instructional practices have helped to reshape, like cultural features in higher ed that continue to privilege white male students? Just being more inclusive and more mindful of instruction that can better build a sense of belonging for a wider array of students. Can you explain like what you've done and how you've kind of helped push that?
So to fully answer that question, I think I need to give credit where credit is due. I've always wanted to be an excellent teacher, and I've invested in that. And I've tried to copy good practices, like learning to dance when I was in middle school. Looked around, copied the people, looked like they knew what they were doing. I tried to do that as a teacher, to copy the best practices, but I always had a sense that I didn't really know. My toolbox didn't have many instructional tools in it. And then I did a postdoc for a couple years in learning sciences, and I thought, oh, now I'll get the goodness that I need. Now I will. No, didn't. And then through the CSTA group in Chicago, Don Yannick, high school teacher here in Chicago, said, well, there's this curriculum called Exploring Computer Science. Sorry, Gail, I'm bragging about you here. And he said, we should check that out. I think it's good. And we're like, we know that. That's like CS Unplugged. Been there, done that. Well, let's go check it out. So we went to the professional development, and that's where we learned that the content is only half of it. The way you communicate and the way you engage the students in their understanding is the other half of it. And a light bulb went off in our head. That was the beginning of ECS being the course that is the standard for the graduation requirement in Chicago. Now, that took another 5 years to happen, and 6 years, and even still working out the kinks. So what is it about ECS? What is it that, for me, made me feel like now I had some tools that made a difference? Well, so Gail would chastise us when we would say, oh, I'm going to ECS training. And she'd say, no, not training, professional development. And quickly we understood the difference. Training is when I know and you don't know, and I'm going to tell you. Professional development is we all know and we organize our efforts so we can get the goodness that we all know and we can all share it together, spread the wealth around. And so Gail was talking about professional development. So this was eye-opening for us here in Chicago. And I will say, as a higher ed educator, that the best tools and the best teaching practices that I have learned, I have gotten from my high school colleagues that are teaching computer science, because they are masters of this craft. Like, their students have to be in the classroom. In college, my students only come, they don't have to come and they don't want to. But in high school, they have to. So the high school teachers really know what they're doing. And let me give an example. In class, as teachers often would say, are there any questions? And there's a lot of questions. But some people don't want to ask their question. They're embarrassed. And some people, like me, have big mouths. And so they'll right away start talking. And then there's this girl over here, and she doesn't ask a question. She's quiet. So what can we do to make sure that everyone's question, everyone's voice is heard? Well, we can say, why don't you reflect in writing for a moment on what you think the answer is to this question? And everyone's writing. Compare your answer to the person next to you. Everybody's talking, everyone's sharing their answer, everybody's voice gets heard. And then you can choose someone at random. What did you talk about? So now it's non-threatening. Everyone could have the chance to have their voice heard, and it can be done fairly quickly. And the practice means that my own bias, while I have to be careful who I choose, it's less likely that my own internal bias is going to affect the discussion, affect the experience of students in a room, because everyone's voice gets heard.
Yeah, wonderful. That's wonderful. And the beauty of that type of professional development is that you actually do it with teachers. Like, you get teachers to do the same exact things that you're asking students to do in the classroom as well. And, I believe that that's why it's been very effective, because I think the teachers have to experience that too. They have to experience that learning process so that they can understand, how their students will be experiencing that in their own classrooms. And, yeah.
And to add to that, Lynn, not only do they have to do it and experience it, but they have to reflect on that experience and really talk about how they felt during, the richest conversations come when people are honest, right? When they say, I was intimidated by that particular comment or activity, or pick your favorite thing, and then we can talk about why. Because there will always be students who have that same reaction. And if we don't surface that, I mean, it's those kinds of things that get in the way of an equitable classroom. Is that we too often those are the people that also don't speak up. So if they're not speaking up, one of the easy ways to deal with the fact that, there's lots of things to deal with as a teacher. If somebody's quiet and they're not causing you any trouble, it's too easy for them to get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
I want to add one other thing. It's possible some of you listening here are not educators and you think, well, this doesn't apply to me. Well, I think a universal truth is the mind cannot stand more than the seat can endure. And when you're in business meetings and everybody's turning their camera off, we know what's going on, don't we? They're doing their email. That's why I want to turn my camera off, because I'm in a meeting and I'm bored and I'm like, well, I'll just I'll do something else at the same time. So what are practices that truly engage and truly communicate? So what we're talking about here applies to the boardroom, applies to business presentations, applies to church meetings, applies to lots of, not just the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to that extent, then let me ask you a question about cultivating student interest and development and motivation in CS and STEM. What are some factors that contribute to their internal drive to persist in CS that you've seen? Some things perhaps that you've seen or that teachers have shared with you.
Are you waiting because you want me to jump in because you don't have a big mouth, Gail? Wait, first I need to write and compare notes with my partner.
I'm the only partner you have here.
Yeah, no, anyone can start. I mean,
I think that computer science isn't. I don't think it's any different than any other disciplinary area, really. What sparks interest in doing anything, right? It's seeing a place for yourself in the doing and in the people that are surrounding you. I think that if anything makes computer science different, it's the fact that the places that you typically see to go in computer science don't look particularly welcoming to the vast majority of people. And I'm going to give you an example that I just thought I found fascinating. I was talking to a very good friend of mine last night, African American, and he was talking about a chorus that he's in, and they are working on diversifying that chorus. He's currently the only person of color in the chorus. And he said that, when he joined it because his partner was in the chorus, his husband was in the chorus, and but he was reluctant because their brochure, surprise, surprise, all white on the brochure. And we laughed because we worked together for years, and we did work at the college board on equity and inclusion. And, 25 years ago, we were talking about brochures, and we're still talking about them. I mean, the simplest things that, if I look at something and you naturally say, well, that doesn't feel like a place I want to be. And then we also don't do, I don't know how anybody couldn't be interested in computer science at this point because there's so much. You can have the social aspect of it, the ethical, the privacy, cybersecurity, robotics. I mean, there's just so much stuff. But at the end of the day, people want to feel like they belong and that there's a potential for relationships and teams and, and I don't think we do a very good job of that. Still, I mean, how often do we sit down and have these kinds of conversations, right? Most of the time, the conversations are about some piece of code, which I can tell you immediately, I want to go find another conversation. So,
I'm pretty sure Dale has some thoughts on this too, but I wanted to share this because it relates to work that Dale and I have done in the past too. One of the exciting things that I felt about computer science, AP Computer Science principles was the notion that students could select their topic of interest, for a project to complete, a performance task or, a project, and it would be of their choosing. And it could be music, it could be art, it could be, a game, it could be, just something that they would create themselves or investigate themselves. And that brought so much excitement for me in terms of how we can sort of shift the perception of studying computer science. And for me, that was, really exciting. It was sort of really exciting work, and Dale was a huge contributor to that aspect of the course and the exam. And so I asked that because perhaps you might, have some examples that your students, might have shared with you about how that sort of changed their mind and increased their motivation to stay within the discipline.
Well, the both comments that you see me looking to the side, and it's not because I'm doing my emails, because I'm typing some notes. But both of the things you said were things that I wrote down. First, what Gail, you said about belonging, about community. I had a student, Eric, he's a Latino student. He says, I'm in computer science because my friend brought me along and said, let's go apply. Otherwise, he never would have done it. And his friend says, you can do it. And he said, I can't do that. His friend's like, oh, yeah, you can do it. Fake it till you make it. Come on, let's go do it. He graduated. So, and then what you said about choice. And somebody said to me recently that particularly under COVID, having choice is very important because in the midst of uncontrollable circumstances, to have choice is significant. I remember when I was getting advice on parenting when my kids are young, they said, don't tell them you have to eat these green beans. Say, do you want to eat these green beans or do you want to just go to bed with no dessert? What's your choice? And so having choice is powerful and gives us a sense of agency. So I think that both of those are really significant. I thought of another one. I don't know if it fits here or not. But I saw Nancy Say was a high school teacher at a national professional development. And I walked into her classroom, and I felt like every time I was around Nancy, I learned something new just by osmosis being around her. But in her classroom, she had a poster up that said classroom norms. And I thought, man, I've never thought about explicitly deciding on classroom norms for my professional development sessions. I should really do that. And I've started doing that with my college classrooms. And my students are first a little taken aback, but they really jump in with a will when they're given the chance to say what's important to you about our learning experience in the class. And we establish classroom norms. We upvote the ones that are favorites, and those become our classroom norms for the class. One of them is to respect the fact that some people don't know the answer and they're in process, that we're all coming from different places. And I think as educators, I know I've been guilty of this, it's so easy to confuse preparatory privilege with aptitude. I think, oh, wow, he's so good at computers. And the reality is he's been programming since he was very young and has tons of experience. And other students, this is their first time out, their first time programming, and it's all new to them. And so it takes them longer. And I have stories with that, but maybe you want to go in a different direction, so I'll just leave it there.
No,
Just
no.
makes me think of my own experience, Dale. That's all.
Yeah.
My very first programming class was a nightmare because it was all men, and they all had some sort of programming class experience before, and it wasn't good. I still to this day don't understand why I stuck it out any more than I understood why I stayed with math after some of the
Well,
experiences I
I
had.
kind of
But
I want to push on that a little bit, Gail. So here you are, a national leader with technology curriculum that you've written that's been transformative on the CS education landscape, but yet you had this experience. What encouraged you to stick with it or to not just give up on that and go do something else entirely?
so I think all of it was related to the fact that I wanted to teach. And I think I wanted to teach. My mother thinks that I wanted to teach when I was 3 because
Wow.
I was kind of, bold. But every negative experience I had in education, every positive experience I had in my early years reinforced the fact that teaching was something I wanted to do. And every negative experience actually made it even more important because I didn't want girls to hear you're born with it or you're not.
Right. Yeah.
Right? I mean, I had a teacher when I was a freshman in high school who recognized that I had moved all across the country like so many times by the time I was 12 that I just kept missing stuff. And it was that preparatory privilege, not because of income, but because of availability. I just missed it. And I was struggling in algebra. And this, bless him, he just wouldn't let me quit. And, he said, you can do it. And then to have a woman be the one to tell me I was either born with it or I wasn't in college was just, I thought, no, I can't let this happen. And I think for computer science, that was exactly, I mean, I never, I didn't go to get a degree in computer science. I finished getting my degree because computers showed up in my classroom, and I figured it was a better choice to know something about them than to struggle all the time. But yeah, it was all about teaching is what it was about. And
Well, for as many years that I've known the both of you, I also believe that you do the work that you do because you believe it's the right thing to do. And, and it's just, that's just who you are. I want to ask you one last question, and that is related to the title of our episodes is called Voices. And so I'd like to ask each of you, about an influential voice, and it could be more than one, but some voices that have been influential for you. A role model could be an author, could be a singer, an actress, or a handful of people or a group of people, I mean, that have been a voice that you've been able to hold on to and have been influential in your life.
I'll go first. I'll give the first answer, which is exactly the wrong answer if you're writing a college essay, and that is my dad. You put that on there, you're not going to get into the school. But nonetheless, my dad really has been one of these voices for me, and he taught me that people want to be loved and understood and valued, and that they are worth being loved and understood and valued no matter who they are and whatever position in life that they hold. He told me about Isidro. I grew up in Mexico and Ecuador. He told me about Isidro. He said, he didn't have much education, but he's probably one of the smartest men that we will ever meet. So didn't have the opportunity, but did have all this aptitude, and we conflate those things. And the other one would be, I'd say, someone who's been a mentor, Eric Hamilton, who started me doing summer education projects in Chicago. And he brought me along and said, oh, help write this grant, help work on this grant, and now write one of your own. And he told me the real mark of us is going to be, what's the work that we do when the funding dries up? Are we still working on it, and do we still care about it?
Hey, Dale, if I had a university, you'd automatically be admitted to my university with that answer. Wonderful. What about you, Gail?
Oh, too many to mention in too many different ways, I suppose. I mean, the teacher that I talked about, right, that turned me in math, right, in the positive direction. My partner of 25 plus years, who supported me and pushed me and didn't think I was crazy when I was trying to do all the things that I was doing. And then some people that this isn't probably the day to be mentioning them, that have been very influential in my life. Making me see race as race as an issue in ways that I might not ever have seen race as an issue without being pushed by them, which I'm grateful for. And my dear friend and colleague, Joanna Good, who I'm blessed to work with every day, and has given me the space to do this work.
Well, I want to say too that I feel very fortunate and very blessed to be able to work with both of you and many others too that you've mentioned, Gail, as well. I really do think that, as I said earlier, that you do it because you know it's the right thing to do and you believe in it, even though it's not easy. I've learned a lot from the both of you, a lot over the years. I'm so appreciative of your work, your commitment, and your friendship. I don't think that I could have gone through, some of the tough times that I've gone through without either of you. And so
I think we feel the same way. I will speak for myself only, but yes.
And I can't say it enough. Both of you are giants in this computer science education community. And I believe that with your voices, you can help rally this community. Like, we have an opportunity to, take strong actions for change. And you've taught me that to be able to stand up for the things that, we see need change. I am very grateful again to have you be in my circle of colleagues and champions to motivate me and many others to keep the movement going. So I want to give you a heartfelt thank you for your time, your compassion, your expertise, in helping us come together and bridge some gaps in computing education. And I believe that, we can work together, and I hope that we will continue to work together to lift our collective voices and support each other in our efforts to change and improve CS education. I can't thank you enough for doing that, and I can't thank you enough for being a part of this episode of Voices.
Thanks,
for having
Lynn.
us.